Okay. More fearless. The part where you said the stream is silent is probably just when I had the music off. So, actually, before I continue, can you hear anything here? Because I'm kind of concerned if that doesn't work. Any moment now. Everything's swapped out here, so I'm not so sure what's going on. Oh well. Let's just get start with this then. And I'm doing this again because I liked how I did it last time. So this is the Mega Man tier list. Yay! We'll start with these are out of order, unfortunately. Mega Man 4. I like this one. I don't really revisit it very much, but I seem to enjoy playing through it most of the time, so that's something. Mostly how I judge a game is how much use I get out of the Robot Master abilities and how annoying is the level design. I feel like Mega Man 6 falls in a similar boat, but just a bit higher. Uh, I really like the design in 6 and how it emphasizes taking different routes. The problem is there aren't really many times where you're encouraged to use the weapons. There's a couple of times here and there, but most of the time I only use them for boss weakness. I haven't played any of the Game Boy games, so we'll just ignore those. Mega Man 1, it's not absolutely horrendous, but at the same time, it's the hardest one for me to revisit because half of the Robot Master weapons are just completely useless. And the level design is incredibly cheap. But it's still not terrible. The weapons that I am able to use are pretty good. Mega Man and Base. Of all the games here, this is one of two games that I have not completed. Because the level design is even more ridiculous than the first one. This one just feels like it had strict level design that they forgot to play test or something. This is intentionally difficult on the most obnoxious level. And I'll leave it at that. I like Mega Man 1. It's probably my second favorite. Played Mega Man 6. Yeah, I, I don't mind this game. There's a lot of them that I'll put a bit higher. Uh, 11's a high B for me. It's the other one that I haven't completed yet. Mostly because they made the Wily Castle a bit tricky there. And the levels themselves are really long. Hold on one moment. back to business, I guess. Okay. Mega Man 2 is another entry in the series I'm a bit mixed about. It is good, but I do not think it is the best. The Robot Master stages and weapons are an improvement, but the latter half of the Wily Castle is ridiculous. Probably the examples I'll bring up are the boss that's only weak to the Crash Bomber. And once you run out of energy, you're basically done. And have to replay the whole level all over again. And then the final phase of Wily himself is only weak to the bubble lid. It's an improvement over some of the ones down here, but I don't see it as the best. I believe 3 for last because I have the mixed feelings there. 7 is great. I really like 7. It takes that expansive level design from 6 and with the polished graphics, this is probably the entry where I use the Robot Master weapons by far the most because I have a use for all of them. If I need to spread projectile from the top or the ceiling, I can use the Freeze Man thing. The Thunderbolt just blasts through enemies. The Junk Shield. 1 is the entry where you need a bonus item to complete the Wily Castle. You need to get the Magnet Beam in Elecman's stage. And that can either be done by using Gutsman weapon or the Elect Beam. Yeah, 7's pretty good. I know that the Wily fight in that game gets a lot of flack, but I have fun with it when I'm stocked up on E-Tanks, so. Mega Man 9! If this was a few years ago, I would have had this one even lower than Mega Man Base. But after playing it a lot, I've kind of gotten used to it. It still has its fair share of problems, but I find a lot of use out of the special weapons here. The Robot Master stages are very creative. But once again, kind of like 2, I run into some obnoxious Wily stages. The Wily stages are kind of the thing holding this one back because the main problem I run into is unlike 10, which we'll talk about in a minute, you have to go through the Wily Fortress in one sitting. So unless you purposely grind for a bunch of bolts or something, you have to go in there with what you have. And with how many surprise pits and spikes are there, it gets annoying really fast. Mega Man 5 is probably the most forgiving game in the entire series, aside from one we'll bring up later. I don't find much use out of the weapons there, mostly because of one thing. The charge shot is so powerful in this game that it pretty much almost invalidates using any other weapons except for the Crystal Eye. But the level designs of these are fun, and it's also fun to figure out what applications for the stranger weapons are there. Like the charge kick and the power stone. There are uses for them, but you got to figure out where. It's a fun one to play if you want to find a use for every weapon. I really like Mega Man 8. Kind of like with what I said with 7 and 6. It takes what works there, adds probably my favorite visual style of the whole series, and in this game, I use the special weapons the most. Probably because they're needed to traverse certain terrain, but there's never a moment where there's one I've used more than the other. I love how they're integrated into level design. The voices are cheesy, yes, but the rest of it is great. And I'd probably say that this is probably the easiest game in the series. Okay, other than Wily 1, we don't talk about Wily 1. 10 gets a lot of flack for living in Nine's shadow. And of course, I'm kind of biased when I say this, but as 10 being the game that I completed first because of its easy mode and the versatility, the abilities, I would probably say that 10 is the best starting game because of its easy mode. 2 has one, but it's mostly just a watered down version of the original game. 10 is a deliberately designed easy mode for new players, and all the weapons in there are so much fun to use. A well timed Thunder Wool or making the commando bomb fly around is always satisfying. 3 is another one that gets a lot of flack, but kind of like 5, it's one where you need to. Oh, I like the baseball level. Yeah, the Robot Master levels in there are very creative. I see 3 get a lot of flack, mostly for its weapons. And yes, they're not overpowered, crazy weapons like the ones from 2. But that's not a bad thing. There are still plenty of applications for them. You can use the hard knuckle on some bulkier enemies or those snake mini bosses. A well timed top spin can deal with some of the smaller ones. Search Snake can do a similar function. The only one that I really don't use much is the Gemini laser. The Robot Master stages are fun. The only real problem I have are the Doc Robot stages. Other than that, I'd say it's pretty good. So this is it for these. I don't really have a definitive best game because I probably just rotate between these, and I enjoy all of them except Mega Man Base. So yeah, we're back here again for a galaxy far, far away because this one has a few additional entries that I was not able to cover in the other one. And starting with A New Hope, it has aged very well. The performances of everybody in there are so well known that you could probably just sit at the back of your head and at least think of Harrison Ford or James Earl Jones's Vader voice and Mark Hamill and especially Carrie Fisher. Still great. Oh boy, Attack of the Clones again. Well, of course, I can fix this by putting the Phantom Menace somewhere else. Attack of the Clones, kind of the same spot as it was before. I'll just put these animated shows I haven't watched down here. Should be everything. There's a lot of it that I like. Ewan McGregor does a good job. And meanwhile, Ian McDermott doing his Palpatine shenanigans is also entertaining. Even the stuff with uh, Anakin and Padme, which gets a lot of flack, it's still entertaining. It's interesting to see a perspective of a inexperienced Jedi surrounded by a bunch of Jedi who know what they're doing. The problem is some of the scenes in here just go on for way too long, which is fine for the story it wants to tell. It just moves really slow. Return of the Jedi's in a similar spot too. It feels weird to say it's my least favorite, the original trilogy, because it's still fantastic. I think it's mostly because a lot of the B plot there with Han and friends kind of doesn't really go anywhere. Mostly why I revisit this one is for the main Luke and Vader plot, which is still done beautifully. And of course, the Ewoks are fun. Revenge of the Sith, still my favorite of the prequel movies. I feel like it captures the goal that they had in mind since the Phantom Menace the best, of showing the origin of Vader and Palpatine's rise to power. Though we never did learn why Yoda hangs out on Dagobah. Oh well. Still good. There's a few awkward scenes here and there. But the second half of the movie's fantastic. Rogue One is still great. It's probably my favorite recent Star Wars project, and even then it's been like 10 years since that came out. So it's interesting to see a ground level story in this universe, because all of our other theatrical entries are involved with the Force and Jedi characters in a way. We don't really get to see what everyone else is doing on the ground during the reign of the Empire. And Rogue One does a good job of that, as well as Andor, apparently. Sadly, the Clone Wars movie still wasn't that great. It doesn't really convey the core of the show very well, because it's mostly just three different episode plots stitched together. And it mostly just didn't capture the show very well. The Clone Wars show I would put pretty high on here, but I still haven't watched all of it. Though I have said that if you had issues with the prequels, this kind of helps fix most of them, which, hey, I'll take it. Empire Strikes Back is still incredible. It's a very boring opinion, but I feel like that this movie is probably one of the most important sequels of all time. I can't say the most important because there are several you could make that argument for, like a Shrek 2 or a Toy Story 2. You could probably say those are very important. But I think in terms of the general pop culture and cinema landscape, this movie is what changed it and forever became the core of it. Whenever anyone thinks of Star Wars, most of the time they think of something from this movie. That's true. Force Awakens. I liked it when it came out. I liked the cast of characters there. They had some fun chemistry together. My main problem with it was it just felt like they were trying to recreate the New Hope. So it felt like most of the characters were forced to obey certain roles to kind of be like that movie, which is a shame because a lot of them had some interesting stories that they could have told. Mainly, the dynamic with Finn and Poe was super fun to watch, and even with Ray thrown into the mix, it's fun to see them all as a trio. The problem is we never really got to see this story fulfilled because they switched directors with this one, The Last Jedi. I kind of understand what they're trying to do here. They're trying to implement an element of legacy and kind of describe ideas that there's a lot more to the Jedi and how the Force operates. But at the same time, there's just a lot of stuff thrown in there that really doesn't make sense. Not in a I don't like the new characters way, in a this on a thematic level does not make any sense. Though Yoda popping up and setting Luke's house on fire was pretty funny. I did like that. And Carrie Fisher was the best part of the movie. I really wish that they were able to tell the story they wanted to with Rise because that was supposed to be about her, but Carrie Fisher passed right before they finished that movie. So they hastily had to rewrite the script. All three of these newer ones are an interesting lesson in trying to adapt to uncertain studio circumstances. They're not my favorite thing that Star Wars has produced, but they're not my least favorite thing ever. I still find more enjoyment out of these than the Clone Wars movie. Mandalorian is so much fun. Kind of like how I liked Rogue One. I like how we have another grounded story here. The casting here is great. The stories probably make it fit for the episode format really well. It took a little bit of a dip with the third season because they tried to use it as a launching point for more projects. When what made this so great was it was its own story, but oh well. I think there's a lot here about um, the Mandalorians as a whole that I'd probably appreciate a bit more if I watched the stuff with Mandalore in the Clone Wars because Bo-Katan, for example, made her debut in Clone Wars. Still good. Cool that we had the director responsible for Iron Man on this. Phantom Menace. I have become a lot more forgiving to Phantom Menace. I can see the cracks, yes, but as an entry and rather entry point for new fans, I kind of feel like it did a better job than Force Awakens. Because this kind of shows us a point in time that we never got to see from the original movies. We got to see the build up to the Clone Wars, Palpatine messing things up behind the scenes, Liam Neeson, and of course, the very beginning of Anakin Skywalker. Yes, this movie is still ridiculously cheesy, but you know what? The original trilogy has some equally cheesy moments in there. I will say some of the silly stuff is a bit overkill here, but some more silly things are kind of at the heart of this. I mean, part of like of A New Hope, for example, is like a joke of Obi-Wan playing mind tricks with the Jawas. It's ridiculous, but it still makes it fun. And while the Gungans can be a bit much at times, the varied planets here are still super fun to watch. And yes, it is a bit dialogue heavy. But it's one of those movies where, with context from the later entries and Clone Wars, everything makes sense a bit more because this movie's mostly just planting the seeds for later stuff, which is fine. It has its problems, but it's not the worst thing ever made. That's my current ranking with these. I think I've gotten a lot more forgiving to some because they think Rise of Skywalker and Phantom Menace were a bit lower. But with some more knowledge from watching them again, I, yeah. All right, it's time. Time for the one with Shrek. Okay. I haven't watched Ants. I've heard Ants is okay. I've heard Prince of Egypt is really good, but I have not watched it. Road to El Dorado is a movie that I've heard get a lot of fans as of recent. A lot of people didn't like it upon release, but it seems to have its fans now. I have not watched King of Dreams. Chicken Run. It's fun, like everything else from Aardman. Just a fun, simple story. Yes, I will watch these two. Uh, also, just like it to watch the stop motion work from Aardman Studios. It's not really the most complex story out there, but it's still fun to watch. Shrek. I think that's all I had to say. This movie has aged so well to the point that I can still randomly quote this and people still know where it came from. I still see T-shirts with like Shrek quotes on them or something. It's incredible just how much this movie left an impact on both studios and audiences alike to kind of lead to a change in animated film, really. And Shrek was a pioneer for that with how it won the first Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. There's so many things that Shrek has done here that kind of changed the industry forever, for better or worse, depending on the person you ask. But I feel like some of the themes and stuff from Shrek have, with people considering them, have helped a lot. And then Shrek 2 just breaks down the door and continues what makes the first Shrek great and makes it even better. The new cast members work so well with the previously established ones. The story here is still probably my favorite one that DreamWorks has ever told. And everything about it just makes it a joy to rewatch, especially this year with its 20th anniversary. Shark Tale, I have not watched, and I don't know if I should. Yeah, it depends on the day for me. I like these two equally as much. Madagascar. That's not Madagascar. This is Madagascar. Still really funny. It it seems to be the one of the Madagascar franchise that I like the most because the, the kind of dry humor is a lot better there compared to later entries. And just because some of the background jokes with some of the other zoo characters and especially our main cast, they're all fun to watch. I don't revisit it much, but the jokes are still amusing. So remember how I said I like Aardman? Uh, Curse of the Were Rabbit is so much fun. Again, kind of like Chicken Run. It's not really the most thought provoking story out there. It's mostly just to watch the impressive stop motion work of Aardman, as well as the humor that you'd get with Wallace and Gromit. Very fun. Over the Hedge is really funny. I had avoided this movie for years because I thought it would be terrible, but it's not bad. The Terminator is hilarious, and some of the situations the casts are in are amusing. The only reason this isn't higher is just, I don't have much to say. It wasn't as terrible as I thought it would be, but I don't really have much to say. Shrek the Third. This movie gets such a bad rap, and I don't know why. Obviously, it's going to be hard to follow up uh, 1 and 2, but it still isn't the worst thing Dreamworks have ever made. I see that sentiment shared a lot, and it confuses me because, yeah, some of the jokes don't land, but I like how they take the story from 2. And of course, the high school stuff's a bit awkward, but that's kind of the point. It does get a bit ridiculous during the second act with the stuff with Merlin, but that's redeemed with a nice, heartfelt conversation from Shrek to Artie. Still great. It's not the best Shrek entry. It's fine. What other ranking could I put this in than B? That look, the memes that spun out of this were funny, but the movie itself is just it exists. That's kind of where I'm at with B movie. It exists. I don't hate it or love it. It just exists. It kind of feels like that it was wanting to do what Over the Hedge kind of did, but then Jerry Seinfeld stepped in and said, "You know what? How about we have every line of dialogue basically be a B pun? Wouldn't that just be funny?" And it kind of gets old really fast. It, it's still funny out of context, and I recognize how it's affected internet culture, but it still just kind of exists. Kung Fu Panda, another great one that I don't really see people talking about much. They talk about 2 a lot more, which, well, except when I'm talking about some of the memes, which there are a lot of memes from this one. Still great. The cast does a fantastic job. And of course, Jack Black as Poe works so well. And Master Oogway is So good in this movie. Kung Fu Panda 2. They take what worked in the first one and made it even better. I like they did with Shrek. Exploring a different aspect of Poe was intriguing to watch through Kung Fu Panda 2. Shen is probably the most intimidating DreamWorks villain that they've ever made. Well, I mean, aside from death itself, but you can't really compete with that. Madagascar to escape to Africa. I like this one. It's nice to see the characters go back to Africa and either reunite with a new herd or their families. Expanding upon Alex was pretty cool. Just feels like it leans into the zany penguin humor a bit much here. I don't hate monsters versus aliens, but all I can really say is take what I said about B movie and dial it up to 11. This movie just exists. I don't really know what else to say. I kind of have similar feelings for Crude's, Turbo, Mr. Peabody, and Sherman, and Holm. I don't really hate them. It's just hard for me to really say anything about them. Other than the fact that Turbo just feels like a copy of the first Cars movie to me. I don't know. Actually, no. Peabody and Sherman was kind of entertaining. I'll put it a bit higher. The rest of these, I mostly just forget they exist. How to Train Your Dragon is still great. Probably a good example of an adaptation. The characters are all great. The cast is good. I like the exploration of human and dragon interactions here. And I'm looking forward to seeing the Wild Robot because the same guy behind this is working on it. The animation for Wild Robot looks a bit choppy at some points in the trailer, but I think that the story itself won't turn out too bad because we got a pretty good director at the helm. Back Forever After. Not my favorite of the Shreks. My main problem with it is that Shrek kind of feels out of character to be willing to leave his entire life and family behind just for a day where he can be a menace to the town again. Well, that's true. It doesn't really do a great job of adapting the book for How to Train Your Dragon, but the story was compelling enough for me to enjoy it. But back to Shrek Forever After, the whole movie just feels weird to me. It feels like everybody just isn't there even before Shrek signs the magical contract. It feels like it relies on a lot of callbacks from the first movie. If this was like a what if story or something, I'd probably like it a bit more. But the fact that Shrek's send off is basically the majority of it, Shrek gets put in an alternate timeline because he's irresponsible and upset that nobody takes him seriously, just doesn't make an entertaining movie for me. But what is entertaining is Megamind. Oh, how they butchered you with the streaming show. This is still one of the best things Dreamworks has made. The This is how you write a villain redemption arc. I've seen so many villain redemption arcs where the villain does something absolutely horrible, and then in like the second act of the film, they're like, I'm sorry, I had this tragic backstory that made me this way. And then they suddenly switch sides and work with the heroes. This, I like how this takes that premise in that there's no heroes for him to fight. And because he's crafted his whole well being around fighting Metro Man, he doesn't know what to do with himself. And how he redeems himself feels genuine because he recognizes how destructive he was when he sees himself reflected through Titan. And of course, the cast is great. Probably my favorite animated Will Ferrell role, to be sure. A great deconstruction of superhero tropes. Good movie. Uh, Puss in Boots just kind of falls in the same category as these ones. It just kind of exists. It was a lot more charming than the rest of these, but it kind of felt like it lacked what made Shrek such a standout because Shrek kind of critiqued generic storytelling and the limitations of it, but this kind of just felt like a by the book story that didn't really take any risks. Though its sequel did, and that paid off. Madagascar 3. I really like where the characters are left off in Escape to Africa. Having them suddenly join the circus just doesn't make any sense. And it's mostly because of shenanigans with penguins. It kind of felt like that Europe's Most Wanted was the Penguins of Madagascar movie before their actual movie. And it felt like that they leaned more into obnoxious humor rather than sort of dry humor that worked so well in the first movie. The first movie had the two monkeys, and they're funny. just for with how they're just going through the motions and like pulling out coffee to start the trash can to start the day. That's funny. Marty singing Afro Circus is only funny so many times. And the plot with the tiger who gave up on the circus just does not make any sense. And the weird rivalry he has with Alex just is also weird. Rise of the Guardians, while having a simplistic story, is a fun time. The premise of taking the stories and ideas of holidays and taking them in this direction is so much fun and a fascinating idea. Sadly, all I really see people talk about with this movie nowadays is kind of the internet impact of Jack Frost when there's a lot of cool stuff in this movie that I wish more people talked about. Uh, it's not the best thing DreamWorks has made because the plot's a bit generic, but it's still fun. A lot more fun than some of these ones down here. Dragon 2 is okay. I do like how they fleshed out uh, Stoic and Hiccup's mom, but the rest of it just felt like a plot that 3 did so much better. Since it kind of feels like that the antagonist here is just here to destroy stuff rather than the guy in Hidden World who challenges Hiccup's worldview. And because of an individual's actions, Hiccup comes to the conclusion here that humans and dragons simply can't coexist because there will always be someone who wants to separate them, which is a powerful story beat that this one tried to get but didn't really do it that well. Penguins movie. I already browed how much I felt like the Penguins soured later entries of Madagascar. And then this movie comes out and it's just kind of exists like all the other ones. The plot and main problem with the antagonist being that he never got attention because the penguins are more cute and marketable feels a little too meta in a way because with the Madagascar franchise itself, it mostly seems like people were talking about the penguins. That and the secret agent characters are kind of useless. They don't do anything other than to just be annoyed at the penguins' antics. Actually, the whole thing of the story, other than a redemption arc for Private, is just everybody being annoyed with the penguins for jokes, which is just. Eh. I don't really have much to say about these two, other than I've seen the memes about Branch's tragic origin story so many times that probably the original thing would be less interesting. And this is just, eh. I understand that a lot of these are meant for a different generation of fans, but comparing something like Boss Baby or Home to the layered, pun intended, stories of Shrek and Kung Fu Panda that were meant for a similar audience, it just feels weird. This is my ranking of these. Oh, Marvel Cinematic Universe, we're back. Because I watched a few more of these things. Ant Man's great. Love me some Ant Man. This one's kind of just a turbo round that's to get through most of what I already talked about, except for one new one, because there's a special in here that I just saw fairly recently that I really liked. With that, I've kind of just strained my vocal cords from talking about all the other stuff. I will go over everything briefly again after I get all these in place and talk about the new one real quick. Okay, the new one here is Werewolf by Night. It is a Disney Plus special that released last Halloween, and it's great. I kind of like it because it's mostly just a tribute to classic horror films and stories. It, if you've seen like some of the original Universal Monsters movies, you'll probably have a lot of fun with this one. It does a decent job of pulling from the characters' comics, but there isn't much there. And the story's fun. The tribute to horror film is incredible to watch. overall pretty fun. I'd recommend checking it out. So we'll briefly go through these here. Love and Thunder is a movie that I am baffled about its existence every time I think of it. Ragnarok was already leaning a bit too much into the silly for me, and then this just dials it up to 11 and makes everyone unlikable and hard to follow, except Jane. But even then, she's mostly just there for jokes or exposition, or for Thor to not take her seriously. It feels like nothing is taken seriously here, and seeing Thor go from how he was in Endgame, this kind of tragic character who doesn't know where to go next, with how Thanos just destroyed a ship with his people on it, and then half of the population disappears. He doesn't know what to do with himself, and then we just go to funny guy. Doesn't make much sense to me. The Marvels is fine if you want a fun movie to turn your brain off, but the more you start thinking about it, the more it falls apart. Kamala was the best part of the movie, mostly because they just took what worked from her show and rolled with it. Everybody else just feels off. It feels like all Photon is used for here is it just to be the serious character. Pulling from the plot threads of the first Captain Marvel, with her being upset with Carol leaving her behind, is an interesting story to tell, but they don't really do anything with that, and mostly just jump all over the place to suddenly this thing, look this thing, and this thing, all over the place. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. As a Doctor Strange fan, I really like that first Doctor Strange movie. I was looking forward to this. I was not expecting a film where Strange basically does nothing in his own movie. And they had the concept of the multiverse to go to some cool places right there. And all they did was mostly just pick an Earth that's almost identical to the one that we see anyway. And seeing how Wanda's character development from WandaVision was completely regressed kind of made me upset. Because her having a complete 180 from kind of just isolating herself away from the general public, recognizing the consequences of her actions, to murderous killing machine doesn't make any sense. I don't mind America Chavez. I wish that she had a better introduction than whatever this was. So yeah, not my favorite. Black Widow, I kind of dislike for similar reasons. I liked following the character through the Infinity Saga, and I was really looking forward to her theatrical debut. It was still fine, but my main problem with it is this mostly just felt like material to build up Thunderbolt's characters, and not much for Natasha herself. The antagonist was kind of forgettable. Not Taskmaster, the the guy puppeteering everything. And Hitman Quantumania just makes me sad. I loved how I loved how the first two movies had some heist elements in there and some creative usage of the PIM tech to do some fun things with. And of course, the side characters help make for some great comedic moments. But here, it kind of feels like the core of Ant Man is taken away. We don't really have much of a heist. We don't really have any of the none of the side characters return. Luis and friends don't return, which makes me so sad because they were the best part of that of all those movies with their chemistry to everybody else. The whole movie feels like that it's the kickstart movie for some other sci-fi franchise that they happened to put Ant-Man in. Captain Marvel is fun. It's a fun little flashback story. Just my main problem with it is, do you like a movie of character blasting stuff? Because that's kind of the whole movie. The Captain Marvel lineage does some cool stuff in the comics, but here it just kind of felt like that they were more focused on building up how cool she is for her return in Endgame than trying to establish her character. I feel like if they focused more on establishing her character, it would have turned out a bit better. But yeah, could have been a lot better. What if just varies for me because some of the episodes are really good. Um, Ravager, T'Challa, and that Ultron one are great, especially with seeing Ultron pretty much reach his maximum power level or something was cool. But then episodes like Captain Carter or Party Thor just kind of felt like they took concepts from the movie and changed one little thing and didn't really do anything else with it. What if isn't bad? It's just what I would do is I'd recommend handpicking some of the good episodes instead. Hulk's okay. It's not as terrible as people make it out to be, especially with some of these down here. But especially with how many development problems it had in mind, I'm I'm impressed it still came out to a relatively decent movie. I'm kind of sad that this is like the last movie with Hulk in a lead role that we really got, mostly because of Universal. Thor: The Dark World is not as terrible as everyone says it is. But it does get a bit way too serious at times, but there's some fun character dynamics, mainly Thor and Loki, that make watching it a good time. The plot's still a bit forgettable, though. Falcon and Winter Soldier's just okay. I wish they spent more time with Bucky because for a character whose name is on the title of the show, they seem to barely spend any time with him and spend more time with new characters, which is a shame. I would have loved a nice little epilogue for Bucky, where he kind of redeems his name in the general public after what he did as the Winter Soldier. The rest of it's just okay. You could clearly tell that the script for this one was rushed because of external circumstances, because you can tell there's another plot going on that they had to completely cut. She Hulk is also okay. There are some moments where it feels like She Hulk from the comics, some where it does not. It felt like more it was determined on virality and less debuting She Hulk's character. Because there's a lot of moments that are purposely just meant for fans to go crazy and react. I don't know, it's okay. I really like Far From Home, but it's kind of the black sheep of Tom Holland's movies. There's so many plots going on there that I feel like if they just cut the shield stuff and made it focused on Peter trying to leave his hero stuff behind because he doesn't want to think about missing Tony, they could still do some cool stuff for that. But it just all over the place. Ant Man and Wasp feels kind of like the first Ant Man, but not as good. Kind of like with Black Widow, the main antagonist, if you can really call him that, is kind of forgettable. And it felt like they were relying more on isn't this funny kind of jokes instead of the character based humor that the first one was so good with. I used to really like Ragnarok, but I put it so low now because you can see where the stuff from Love and Thunder begins to develop here with its kind of nonsensical slapstick humor and Thor's complete 180 in character. Well, that and the Hulk basically just being a joke. His interactions with Loki here still make it pretty entertaining, though. And I like how the movie fleshes out those two's relationship. My favorite line from the movie is, "Oh, Loki, you're still a god of mischief, but you could be so much more." That's a great line and kind of leads well into the Loki series. Age of Ultron, probably the first of Marvel's entries where I could say is really good. There are a few little tiny problems with it. Mainly, it just feels like that the Bruce and Natasha stuff goes on for a little bit too long and feels like it kind of just comes out of nowhere. That and Thor's scene with the vision of him seeing all the Infinity Stones and stuff just felt out of place, especially when he'd already had experience with an Infinity Stone already. The rest of it's fine. I, I wish that they kind of built up Ultron a bit more because he's one of the Avengers' biggest threats in the comics. They could have done a lot more with him, which the What If showed a little bit with him. But here, it just kind of feels like that he's the wisecracking antagonist of the week, which I mean makes sense given that his personality is based on Tony Stark, who kind of does the same thing in these movies. But like this one could be executed a bit better. WandaVision was great until it just kind of started falling apart in the second half. They really tried to, the first half, kind of to focus on the idea that Wanda is responsible for all of this. But then the second half just goes all over the place, and we get an entire subplot with the characters outside the hex, and the Agatha stuff just doesn't make any sense. And then at the end, it just basically becomes a big battle instead of what the show originally wanted to do. First Thor is pretty good. Probably the best of Thors, in my opinion. It feels like it captures what made him work well in the comics and just took it right to the screen. It feels like the casting's at their best here, too. The Shakespearean esque dialogue might be a turn off for people, but I feel like it kind of helps capture comic Thor a bit better. Overall, pretty good. Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special is ridiculous in the best way possible. It takes callbacks to the Guardians of the Galaxy movies and tells a charming yet silly plot with them. Having Kevin Bacon appear and be central to the plot with how he's brought up in that second movie is still hilarious to me. First Avengers, probably the most iconic of all of these, aside from Endgame. Still pretty good. I think that the director did a bit better here than in Age of Ultron, but that's just me. The other Tom Holland Spider Mans are pretty good. I I like how we kind of get to grow with the character as the story goes on. Some of the other live action Spideys just kind of felt like all the stories happened at once. There's a good gap of time with these, and you can see how much Peter's been through and developed as a character. Definitely watch these. Shang-Chi's fun. It has some problems, but I like how the kind of mystical forest is used. The protagonist himself is fun to follow. And yeah, the CGI is a bit wonky at points, I'll admit. But kind of that's because, again, real world circumstances. Miss Marvel was fun mostly because I already really like the original comic series. My only gripe with it is the cosmic elements they threw in there with her bangle because her family's history and where she came from is such a core part of the character, and kind of changing that to just make her another cosmic character isn't terrible, but I kind of wish they just stuck with the original with this one. I already said that Loki has some great banter with some of the other characters in the movies he's in. Then Loki takes that while also giving us a nice perspective piece on the character. You kind of get an idea of how he could have changed, kind of going off of that line that Thor said from Ragnarok, where he says, "You could be so much more." And he pretty much becomes that across the entire series. And the supporting characters are fun. Of course, Owen Wilson. Probably the best of the Marvel Disney Plus shows. I would probably rate Werewolf by Night just a little bit higher, even though it's not a show. The Infinity Avengers movies are still incredible to watch and are great ways to close off the story of Iron Man, Cap, and the many other characters we've met along the way. I especially love how kind of the things that they bring up in Avengers with Cap bringing up that Tony's really never been selfless, and Tony brings up that Cap has never really had time to think for himself, is kind of subverted here in Endgame. My only real gripe with Endgame is that it kind of feels like Captain Marvel is just thrown in there. But otherwise, the rest of it is great and easily the best Avengers entry. Ant-Man is so much fun. I don't know why people hate on this movie so much. Especially after Age of Ultron, a smaller story with lower stakes is just what the MCU needed, in my opinion. Luis and the supporting cast are still hilarious, and the actual plot is still so much fun despite its simplicity. Definitely give this one a second chance. Black Panther still stands as probably one of their best releases. The story does have a lot of layers to it, but appreciating them can help you enjoy it even more. It is sad to see that we'll probably never see something like this again because some of the writing crew hasn't come back, and of course, uh, we're never going to be able to see Chadwick Boseman back as T'Challa, which is a shame. He did such a good job as him here and in Captain America Civil War and the Avengers movies. Great morally gray story here. Hawkeye. Hawkeye did what I wanted for Black Widow. To kind of have a nice send off for the character while still establishing some new things. Hawkeye does a great job of sending off Clint while still establishing stuff with Kate Bishop. It feels like this is their show. shared together instead of a project that's mostly for the new character that happens to feature the old one. Some of the plot points do get a bit weird, but other than that, I don't really have any problems with it. Captain America Civil War is probably my favorite of the crossover movies, but Endgame's impact on me is a bit bigger. The way they take the story from the comics and make the characters' motivations a lot more believable makes this an enjoyable revisit for me. But other than the fact that Tom Holland just basically steals the whole movie. And even then, everyone else does a good job here. It's a great character study into where Tony and Cap are at now from their debut. Speaking of Tony, Iron Man 2 and 3 are still really good. Some of the antagonists' motivations are a bit weak at times, but seeing how they flesh out Tony is still a joy to watch. Well, that and the many different armors that you see alone makes the experience worthwhile. Doctor Strange is another one that gets a lot of flack, and I don't know why. Yeah, the story is kind of simple. And yeah, the protagonist is arrogant at first, but that's the point. We see him grow and become wiser through his journey on the mystic arts. And Caecilius is basically just a reflection of him in a way, only seeing the power of the mystic arts and nothing else. So, a great movie. Captain America Winter Soldier is often brought up as one of the best MCU entries that they've made, and I agree. This takes what was established with Steve Cap and takes it in such an interesting direction while still doing a great job pulling from the original Winter Soldier comic. It's interesting to see a continuation of Cap not really knowing who to trust in this new world that he basically woke up in. And while it's revealed that Hydra is rooted inside of S.H.I.E.L.D., S.H.I.E.L.D. themselves still do some things that Cap disagrees with, and he still doesn't know whose side to be on. Of course, the first Cap and Iron Man are still fantastic movies, and probably the ones that I would say are some of their best work. The characters, their environments, how the whole story plays out is just done so well here. And of course, Guardians of the Galaxy does everything so well because it takes away from a traditional Marvel mold and rolls with it. And the character work is some of my favorite, the entire series. What they do with characters like Drax and Nebula is so fascinating to me, especially seeing how their journeys pay off in Endgame and especially in Guardians 3. So yeah, that's it for these. I think I'm probably going to wrap it up here. This was another interesting little experiment, but I'm probably not going to be doing another one of these for a while. This was mostly just a thing to test my new audio that I set up, and I'll see how that turns out in a bit. So I will return at some other point in time.